Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and you're listening to Deficits and Government Debt 101. So the point of this video is just to kind of discuss what are deficits, what is the government debt, and why are they an issue? Okay, what's the problem? Okay, so first let's define our terms. So when we talk about the government debt is the accumulated debt since the government has existed. Okay, so it's not how much they borrowed this year, it's how much they borrowed always. So basically, what's your, kind of like analogies, what is your credit card balance? Okay, so how much money do you owe on your credit card? A deficit is how much you borrowed during a period of time. So basically, how much more did you spend over what you've received? So when the government has a deficit in a particular year, the way you make up that deficit is you do borrow the money. So that does add to the debt, but that's only really 1 year's portion of the debt. Okay, so when a government runs a budget deficit, so a government could still have growing debt, but still not run a deficit in a particular year because of the way government does accounting. So a little bit about how government does its accounting. Most companies do what's called zero-based budgeting, which means every year we assume that everybody gets zero. And you have to say, so if you're a particular department in a particular company or school or whatever, you have to go back and say, okay, here's what I need for the next year and why I need it. You have to justify. So it's not about whether you did well or did poorly. It's, okay, this is what we did this year. Some of it went well, some of it didn't. Here's what we plan to do next year, why we plan to do it next year, and you justify what you need out of the budget, and you may or may not get that. Okay? In government, they do what's called baseline budgeting. So basically, you will operate under the assumption that next year, you're going to spend the same amount of money plus a little bit extra. So basically, government growth in the spending is just built into the equation. So oftentimes, so every time you put up together a budget, it basically projects spending and revenues 10 years into the future. So a lot of times when people say they've cut government spending, they haven't actually cut actual spending, but they may have cut, let's say, the projected expenditure on year 9, or reduce how much we expected to spend on year 10, which then can be changed before year 9 ever even happens, so it becomes meaningless. But people can say that. They say, hey, look, we cut spending. We cut $1 million out of year 9. Okay, it's like me saying, hey, I saved $1 million from money that I thought I was going to spend 9 years from now. That doesn't make sense. You know, so much can happen in 9 years. So this is sort of the fiction in government budgeting. Because oftentimes when politicians say they've cut spending, they've increased spending, they say, oh, we've spent something on something you believe in. They may have just said, hey, we're going to spend something on year 10 on the thing you believe in, but nothing's actually being spent now. So it's done in a way that's sort of very difficult to measure. Okay. So now you have a little basis on what deficits are, what the government debt is, what's government budgeting like. Of course, there's a lot more to it than this. It's complicated. But this gives you a basic idea so you can have an intelligent conversation. Now, the problem with deficits is, again, deficits increase the debt. Now, the problem with debt is that when government borrows money, it's borrowing from it's got to borrow them from somebody. Okay? It's not like there's just infinite resources out there. So it's got to go out there and borrow from actual people who have money to lend out. Now, the actual way that the federal government borrows its money is that every week it auctions off its bonds. Its bonds are the instruments that represent its debt. It auctions off its bonds to the biggest banks in the world, referred to as primary dealers or government securities dealers, all your household name banks, and they will bid on it. Okay, and generally, a higher bid means a lower interest rate for the government. And basically, that's kind of how the government borrows money. But the money that those banks lend to the U.S. government is money that it does not intend lend somewhere else. And it's not like the banks won't lend it somewhere else. They will, okay? Even if it's parked in the money market and then used to lend to somebody else for a house, for a business, or for anything. Okay, there's a bajillion different uses for money. There's never a lack of a need for capital. So basically, if government borrows $1, that's $1 that somebody else can't borrow. So that's one problem, the crowding out factor. You are limiting other potential uses of that money. Now, also, government can, but because of that, other people do have uses for that money. They're going to be willing, if they really, 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 again, it depends on the uses. So, for example, if I have a business idea that only functions based on, let's say, 2% interest rates, then if government borrows so much money that the only way for me to get people to lend me money is to pay 3%, I'm just not going to borrow the money because my business model is not affordable on that type of money. But if there are business models that could survive, that could function with higher costs of debt, then basically what's going to happen is that they're going to bid up the capital that's left over. So interest rates will go up. Okay, so you got to basically think that interest rates go up if there's a lot of demand for capital and that people's business models can support that cost of capital. I don't want to get too complicated, too into the weeds. So basically, more people borrow money, the more interest rates go up. So basically, government borrows a lot of money, it could drive interest rates up, which means certain businesses will be never started and other businesses might have a hard time functioning because their costs of capitals become higher, which then goes along with all their other increasing costs. So that has a negative impact on the economy. Now, what happens is that you'll have some people, some economic theoreticians who will basically be like, you don't have to worry about that too much. Because most countries, particularly the U.S., has control over the actual thing it pays its debts in. Okay, so basically it can print money, essentially. So if interest rates start going up, they can just print more money to keep them from going up. Okay. So yes, you can print more dollars, but you can't print teachers, you can't print construction workers, you can't print all the different resources that are out there. So you are, when you borrow that money, when you spend that money, and you distort sort of the different purchasing and selling decisions, you are distorting the actual makeup of resources, their uses of those resources out there, in a way that can have a real impact on the economy. Okay? So that's a problem. Okay, so basically, government borrows a lot of money. It's not only spending money that could potentially push up interest rates, which it could then print money to offset and prevent those interest rates from rising. But at the end of the day, it's still spending that money and burning through actual resources, actual wood, actual labor, actual things that other people in the economy need, which then pushes up those prices as well. You're not pushing up just the price of capital, but the price of all the goods that the government buys. If it buys steel to build tanks, steel is going to be more expensive for other things that need steel, etc. So it's not just interest rates. And they'll say, well, in that case, the only thing you have to worry about is, if interest, inflation then. But then if you have inflation, then you need to push up interest rates. So these people are what's called MMTers, or modern monetary theory. So basically they say, okay, it's okay to run budget deficits if it's to stimulate the economy. And basically what you just need to do is, for all the spending you need on the economy, you should just offset it with appropriate levels of tax increases. Or just run deficits if whatever. And again, it ignores the idea that there's actual resources being burned. It's not just the dollars and cents. It's not just the effect on interest rates. It's just not the effect on on the general price level. There could be individual prices that are affected that are not captured by a general inflation measure that do have great impacts on the economy. Point being is that government deficits, government debt has impact. Okay? On top of it, as the government debt grows, eventually, if interest rates do have to go up because inflation does creep up, the cost of that debt is going to crowd out the budget. So you're going to end up cutting a lot of things that people may or may not depend on because you need to make room for paying the debt because it's too expensive to borrow anymore or too difficult to borrow anymore because interest rates are rising. So it comes at a cost. Notice I haven't mentioned the word default. In all reality, yes. You're very unlikely to have a government default situation if the government prints its own money. Now, if the government borrowed in Bitcoin or borrowed in euros, then it could default. It might not have enough euros, it might not have enough Bitcoin to pay off its debts, but it can't print money, so theoretically, it could print out a bunch of pieces of paper that might not buy you anything to pay you back. So there might not be a formal default on the debt. But again, there is a trade-off when the government borrows money, because money is just a medium of exchange. There is an underlying amount of resources that are being used up when that money gets spent, and that's something that has to be really considered and really thought about. And again, how those resources get used and their prices change is going to affect how other people's dreams and motivations are able to play out. So that's what I want to say about debt and deficits. Okay, deficits and debt do matter. They can drive up interest rates. They can crowd out funding, and in the future, it also increases taxes. Because how do you pay off that debt with future tax money? And not only do you have to pay back what you borrow, but plus all the interest. And a lot of people like to assume that money is going to be spent on things that create a bigger return, which is theoretically possible. You might build a road that makes an economy in a particular area 30% more productive and generate 30% more income in that area. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the 30% increase in productivity in that area that's theoretical makes up for maybe 10 other projects that are complete loss leaders or complete wastes of money or inefficient. So I think oftentimes people overplay how productive and how wealth increasing many government projects are, because they're assuming based on idealized budget numbers. So like, if we spent the money we originally budgeted and got the results we originally expected, we'd get this return. That's very rare the case. You often end up spending more than you expected to spend and getting less of a return than you expected. So I find that hard to believe that you might be getting a return on government expenditures that exceeds the interest cost over time, and then exposing yourself to the risk of rising interest rates down the road, because interest rates can't stay low forever. They can stay low for a long time, but not low forever. And when that time comes, that time's going to come and hurt hard. So point is, debt and deficits matter. Debt and deficits matter a whole lot. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Hopefully you guys found this interesting. Feel free to leave a comment wherever you're watching this, and share it with a friend. And again, go check out alexmerced.com to find more videos, more audio, to learn more. And thank you very much.